For those of you who are not familiar with our work, the mission of the Alliance is to advance justice and equity and economic growth in land development here in the Twin Cities region. And we have a membership of more than 30 community-based organizations and advocacy groups, which we build and work with coalitions centered in and led by Black, Indigenous, immigrant, and people of color communities to build power, write our own narratives, and create transformative systemic change that dismantles the historic and ongoing harms of our region's land use and development policies and practices. And so for many years, the Alliance in our Actualizing Equity series event has continued to create a space for community organizers and aligned stakeholders to build relationships, share knowledge, and strategize together in our work to change the policies and systems that influence racial, economic, environmental, and health equity here in the Twin Cities region. So today we are exploring actualizing equity in climate and environmental justice. And so while the Inflation Reduction Act will unleash historic federal funding to reduce CO2 emissions, it has sparked critical discussions about its lack of intentionality in centering frontline communities, environmental justice and reparations, and addressing climate change and advancing clean energy. So how are organizers in the Twin Cities responding to this latest legislation and ensuring the most historically and systemically harmed communities are prioritized in their work? So here today, we have a panel of organizers, advocates, and energy sector leaders to discuss this question. And with that, I will pass it over to Janiece. She's the Director of Culture and Partnerships at Fresh Energy. Fresh Energy is an Alliance member organization, and Janiece will be moderating the conversation. So thanks, Janiece, and everyone.
Thank you, Juhi, so much for what a wonderful introduction. So excited to be moderating this discussion today on climate and environmental justice. Again, I'm Janiece Watts, she, her pronouns. Yes, and I work at Fresh Energy, a Alliance member. All right, so to get us started with our awesome panelists, we've got Dominique and T and Robert, three people who I have the great fortune of working with in a variety of ways and spaces on environmental justice. I'm very excited to be here with the three of you. So we're just gonna, just so everybody's clear, clear. My cat is climbing the wall behind me, so apologies if you could hear all that. We are going to have kind of a set of three questions addressed to our panelists, and they will introduce themselves and kind of give their responses there. And then we will have time for discussion with the audience if you all happen to have questions. I want to chime in after those kind of series of three questions that will really set the stage for our discussion. But I think as Carolyn said, if you want to drop some stuff in the chat as we go along, that is welcomed, so you can all be part of the conversation, but hold your questions until the end. All right. So get going. Our kind of first question is around kind of grounding us in this conversation. So again, there's been a lot of attention towards the Inflation Reduction Act. This is kind of historic federal funding that was passed months ago. I think it was a great surprise to a lot of people who work in the policy space to see something finally come out of Congress, right, and actually be signed by the president. That has to do a lot around climate action. So it's set to reduce CO2 emissions and to bring a lot of important action and funding towards environmental justice and addressing the climate crisis. But it has also sparked critical discussions about its lack of intentionality in centering frontline communities, as Juhi said. So for our panelists, the kind of question is, either broadly or specifically, how would you describe this moment? Is it a turning point to you? Is it just another piece of legislation that doesn't really meet all the needs that our frontline communities deserve? Is it something in between? What were your initial reactions to the act being passed and coming down, and from what you can see and what you're experiencing, how do you think it's going to impact your work? So to start, I would just say whoever wants to start, but maybe we could start with T. Can we start with you, McClenty? T. McClenty of MN350.
Thank you, Janiece, and good morning, everyone. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Yes.
Okay, good. Good morning. I'm excited to be here. Excited to be part of my co-panelists and to be part of this event. My name is T. McClenty. I use she, her pronouns, and I am the executive director with Minnesota 350. Our mission at Minnesota 350 is to unite Minnesotans as part of the global movement to end the pollution damaging our climate, speed the transition to clean energy, and to create a just and healthy future for all. So Janiece, as I thought about your question, like many of us, we were sitting there waiting, for how are they going to rule on this, right? And so we know that across Minnesota, regardless of the color of our skin and what we do for a living, we all just want a just and healthy future where everyone can thrive. For far too long, we know that government inaction and lobbying from fossil fuel corporations has jeopardized that future. So for us, the Inflation Reduction Act is exciting because it is the U.S. largest ever investment in climate action. It has made it so that the U.S. now has the potential to reduce pollution levels, bolster the wind and solar industries, and create incentives for consumers to choose electric vehicles. I know that that's always a debate among me and my friends, electric vehicles, but it creates incentives for that. And it creates millions of jobs in clean energy economy. But it also has a flip side to it. It has, unfortunately, the bill also guarantees that oil companies across the has access to drill on more public lands, which plays directly into the hands of fossil fuel companies. By enabling our continued reliance on fossil fuels, the IRA could perpetrate harm for those who live near the drilling and pipelines. I know many of you know about the pipelines that MN350 was actively a part of for Line 3. So this is not quite the full success for climate justice movement, but our work is not done yet. MN350 is organizing, we are front facing, so we think that there's work for us to do still. So this package is not perfect. It's kind of on both sides. So we will continue to push for a future that we know is possible for people who look like me and other people who are harmed by some of the negative effects of this bill. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you, T. Yeah, I think it's great to highlight the things that are real positives that this bill act will that we will hopefully, as consumers, as people who live here in this country, we will hopefully be able to access and will mean real change, especially for us to participate in the kind of clean energy transformation that our entire society needs. That's what we have to do. We have to transform everything to get to the just future that you talked about. So it's really important that so much of that is part of this act. But of course, to also say that there are a lot of things that were negatives and things that unfortunately that don't really seem like they're gonna get us as quickly to that future that we need to be in, like those kind of giveaways to the fossil fuel companies that you're talking about, that are really a huge part of the lack of intentionality and understanding how is this actually centering frontline communities when you are going to kind of allow for business as usual to continue. But to move on, to get more of our panelists' thoughts, let's go to Bob Blake. Hey there, Bob. If you are ready to give us your thoughts, we'd love to hear how you are thinking about this act and what it means for your work. Hey there.
Hey, thank you, Janiece. Sorry, everyone. I've got a cold. I've been fighting here for the last couple of days. So, I'll just introduce myself. My name is Robert Blake, and I am the executive director of Native Son Community Power Development. Chief Operating Officer for Indigenized Energy Initiative, and owner of Solar Bear, a tribal citizen of the Red Lake Nation. And I've been building this or putting together the kind of the structure, I guess you would say, for the solar project on a tribal nation, and this project would never have been able to have getting done, or not get done, but get started, right? Like, and because if it wasn't for the IRA Act, and I just think about, like, the tax benefits that are, streamlined now, so the tribes can essentially sell those tax credits out into, the because of the way the IRS put this, let's take, for instance, so just say it's $10 million, right? And you get that 40% tax break on the solar piece, but then you start thinking about, well, I'm using concrete from an American supplier. I'm using this from American supplier. It could go up to like 60, 70% on your solar project, and $10 million solar project ends up costing you $3 million. I mean, this is crazy, people. So to think about it in that context, like, that this is just unbelievable. So, I was just out at the solar conference in Anaheim, California, with 27,000 people out there. And I mean, we were just talking about, this makes building projects in tribal country like the most successful that you can do, right? So are the most beneficial, from a money standpoint. And so, I mean, just for that point alone, I think that this is just historical, and it's absolutely just incredible. But then, of course, there are the drawbacks too, like T mentioned too. So, um, you know, I would prefer, though, to look at it in a sense that, we're giving people a choice, right? Like, we're giving them an opportunity to choose between fossil fuels, or moving in the direction of renewables, and that's what we're trying to do here at Native Sun. And so, with the electric vehicle charging network, and just giving those people, and just giving people just the opportunity. So, that's what I would really have to say about that, Janiece, and thank you everyone for having me.
Thank you. Thank you. I love that. Like, you say, giving people a choice to choose renewables. One, because it's helping bring down the costs of renewables, and that is so important. That is really always, well, it's not the only barrier, right? But it's generally one of the biggest barriers to being able to access renewable energy, to, as I like to say, electrify your life, being able to do things like access solar panels, even electric vehicles. But I mean, you're talking about like building, and so that's where we need to get to on a systemic level. Like, it's great that people can put solar panels on their house, that they can buy an electric vehicle, but those are individual, more personal choices that, like, you can really only do if you have the means. But like, you're having more of, again, systemic solutions that will benefit larger communities and really benefit our entire country and eventually the world. That's what I hear you talking about, and that is really, really important.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
Janiece, I mean, I think that I think what the IRA what really touches on here is that we're giving people the choice, right? Like, and I think through statistically, more people want renewable energy. Like, more people want
Yes.
electric vehicles. Like, these car makers can't keep the amount of they can't keep up with
Keep up.
the
Yeah.
rest, right?
Yeah.
Like,
Mhm.
and people are just true. Excel can't keep up with the waiting list that people want to get on the wind, or the solar, garden, list.
Yeah.
And so,
Hmm.
I don't know. I'm just saying, I think
Yes.
the public is really going to change the direction of actually how this is happening. And I think the IRA is the spark we needed to
Mhm.
really move this at a bigger clip. So that's where I see this at. And I totally understand where the fossil fuel get their little piece of this too, but I just don't see that really happening. It just doesn't make business sense to go down that direction of continually drilling. It just doesn't make business sense anymore.
Yeah, thank you, Robert. Yeah, and I think that's one of the biggest. I think it's been a tactic for the environmental and climate movement to like keep hammering home that renewables are cheaper and fossil fuels are keep getting more and more expensive. They keep costing us more, and we actually see the way that they cost us more in terms of climate shocks, right? Like the climate crises, that things that are happening to our world, like that is part of the cost analysis that we have to keep hammering home, that fossil fuels will continue to keep costing us more than renewables. I see some things in the chat, but I want to get Dominique in here first because part of our panel. So hey there, Dominique, how are you doing? I would love to hear your thoughts about the IRA specific. If you want to talk about that specifically, the Inflation Reduction Act, just where you kind of see climate, environmental justice policy making a difference in your work as an activist, how you feel how this is coming up for you, and how are you?
Thanks, Janiece. I'm doing great, and I'm happy to be here and be able to listen to Bob, to T, to you, to everybody. I'm glad folks are already asking questions in the chat because I'm looking forward to that discussion portion. So I'm a community organizer in the Twin Cities and restorative justice practitioner. And I work for the Sierra Club, the North Star chapter here. And Sierra Club is an organization who did endorse and support the Inflation Reduction Act for a number of reasons. And I guess I'll share my thoughts, and I think, tactically how I think about this as an organizer who works for mainstream environmental organizations. And I think that the limitations of legislation, the limitations of this bill is the same as limitations of all legislation. It's kind of a top-down approach. And as someone who works in environmental justice, I like to see environmental justice as like the canary in the coal mine for where those impacts of climate change are going to be felt, who they're going to be felt by, and how they're going to be dealt with. And so us as an organization supported by a member base chose to support this. And having supported it, we're looking at the benefits, obviously, like folks have named. And we're also in a moment of reckoning by listening to some of those partners or communities who are a little bit more critical or who are sounding the alarm about how much farther we need to go. Everyone's calling this a historic investment, right? Why is it historic? Because it's like billions of dollars. But it's also historic because we're playing catch up as a nation who has an outsized share of our own emissions. We're playing catch up as a nation who previously withdrew from the Paris agreements. So there's a lot of catch up that we need to do. But also, it's important to look at like how it's become historic, because those are the issues where we need some of the most attention. And, folks have said that it has the potential to cut carbon emissions from the US by like 40% over the next decade or so. And it offers billions of dollars in investment to folks like Bob, who are doing this work on the ground to provide this transition to BIPOC communities, to working class communities, so that it's accessible to rural communities, right? And because of that, it has the potential to address things like pollution, upgrade transportation and infrastructure, clean up toxic sites. And it also is a step in the right direction because it stabilizes those investments that people need to survive this transition to clean energy and to keep our communities and land resistant to the changes from climate change. But the way to support it and to further it is to make sure that it's a part of a comprehensive plan to restructure the entire economy. So in my opinion, the biggest limitation of the bill is it is more concerned with the sustainability and expansion of the industrial economy rather than investing in alternative systems. And the expansion of the industrial economy through militarization, through war, through extractivism, through capitalism is kind of what brought us to this moment. Multinational corporations, the ones who do everything to fight environmental regulations, they do everything to fight unionization, they do everything to fight democracy. They should not see a future in a post-carbon world. And the way that we try and transfer ourselves to a post-carbon world should ensure that environmental destruction is no longer profitable. Part of the reasons why we know we're not taking a comprehensive step towards shifting this entire system is things like $500 million within this bill being earmarked for the Defense Production Act, right? So things to go to the Pentagon, to the Department of Defense to ensure national security and homeland security interests are kind of signs that we may be protecting these multinational corporations a little bit more than we're worrying about resilience for the everyday American. I think if we want to make it a transformative moment, all the communities, the elected officials, the organizations who played a part in this need to start to invest and articulate what those alternative systems look like. And I think the key watermark of an alternative system is that it sees social relations change in a way that allow people to have a greater say in production. They limit the profitability of harmful industrial activity and restore decision-making power to individuals, taken away from those corporations. So environmental justice is both the goal that we want to reach through this, but it's also a means of achieving that goal. And one thing that I think makes me hopeful as just an organizer who works for an organization undergoing a lot of internal organizing, working to be transformational, is that it provides this funding that can go directly for environmental justice work in community. So although federal grants are not always the most accessible way to get funding to communities because they have a complex relationship of NGOs, municipalities, major players, local institutions like that, but organizing the work that we're doing here, it could really help to bridge those gaps and streamline that process. And it shows too that funding can support long-term transformative projects. I think one recent example, just to quickly close out, is a couple of years ago, myself and a coworker worked with the city of Minneapolis on a program to get community members to intervene on Xcel Energy's 15-year energy plan. So in order for that project to be successful, the city worked really hard to ensure that all of the grant money that was available for community organizations was easy to access, was made available to all folks who had interest, and came with the clear support to invest in the perspectives of those folks who we were asking to come to the table. So this resulted in a record number of comments being provided to Xcel Energy to shape their 15-year energy plan. And I also think it solidified relationships between organizations who maybe look at housing or maybe look at criminal justice, and they were able to see themselves as crucial drivers of environmental work. And I think that through building collaboratives like that, through working across sectors like that and organizing to streamline some of these funds, we could start to build the movement that we need to take the IRA bill a bit further. Thank you.
I'm just gonna breathe all that in, because man, Dominique, you always bring it's so wide ranging, but it's so deep. That analysis you just brought for us around militarization. So talking about ways that corporations often sabotage us, really their own selves too, right? But these are what we're fighting. The uphill battle that we're battling is against things like militarization, the demonization of unionization, right? For workers having rights and safe conditions to do this work in across the board, and just really help us see the really big picture of especially when it comes to federal legislation like this, why it's so historic, why it's so big, because climate action has to touch everything, every single part of our society. And that includes the way that we engage in the world, but us as the US, how we engage with the rest of the world. So thank you for bringing so much of that in. And then you really tied it at the end there to organizing, coalition building that we are doing here in our communities, right here in the Twin Cities, right here in Minnesota, because it's really this is how we take these global issues that we have to address, but how are we going to do that right here on the ground locally? So really, thank you for that. That was fantastic. And I just want to give space for T and for Bob to respond, and or Jamie, if you want to expand on any of that, because there was, between the three of you, there's so much there. But one more thing I really like that you said was limitations of legislation, because that is very true. I work at Fresh Energy. I should have said earlier that we are a policy organization. That's what we do is advocacy and policy kind of shaping. So we work in spaces like the legislature and at city level, at the federal level. We were also very excited and very much praised a lot of the Inflation Reduction Act, because it was incredible to see so much be put into this act and for it to actually pass, like I said, because we don't get that a lot from our Congress. But yeah, there are of course limitations, and we as an organization working here in Minnesota, working with all of you, like how do we take what's there in the legislation and bring it home to our communities right here. So yeah, just want to, if T or Bob or Dominique want to jump in or respond to any of that before we move on to our next question, but it's so juicy.
I think like you said, Dominique knocked it out the park, and I think all of us gave different responses. I think organizing is key. As you talked about, Janiece, MN350 is also a C4 organization. And so we were like, organized, and we continue to organize. And I'll talk about that a little bit in our next question. But I think it's important to be out there and hear what the public is saying, so then you can kind of create your strategies on how you want to move forward. And then also to bring the information to the public as well, to disseminate it in the way that everyone can understand. Because sometimes how we go out and we talk to the public, we don't always consider the cultural differences and the things that they're facing in their community. So it's important to know what the community is dealing with, when they wake up and they're, starting their day. It's important to know what they're saying. So then you can make sure that you have their ear, because if you don't understand what the community is dealing with, then they're not going to quite understand and support the work that you're saying. This is important. The IRA bill is coming out. They won't quite understand, because if that community is dealing with, gun violence and all those other environmental issues that they face every day, trying to make sure that their kids know how to drop down to the ground when there's shooting happening, they're not going to hear you. So I think what Dominique said was right on when we talked about organizing. So I just wanted to add that piece.
I just want to say, man, that whatever Dominique says, I'm just with 100% because his brother's live, and that's what I said when y'all were looking for that extra person on his panel, and you said Dominique. I was like, hey, man, get that dude, because he brings it like that, and so I'm just lucky to be in some spaces where I get to work with Dominique, and so. Enough said, man. Let's go to the next question.
Well, I'm looking forward to being in spaces with you both, Dominique and you, Bob. So, hey, let's work together.
Oh, 100%. So much love to you, Dominique, and of course to you, T and Bob as well. You all bring so much to obviously the work that is happening right here on the ground. So yeah, let's talk about organizing. That is our next question. So from organizing against incinerators to advocating for local Green New Deal, there are many active and innovative campaigns and efforts that are happening right here to advance environmental and climate justice in our communities. So we'd love to hear a little more specific about what y'all are working on. What projects are you working on and that are having success in mobilizing our communities towards real change? And, also, we know as organizers that it is not, success is always, I think, not to say a moving target, but progress, it's a lot of ways to measure success. So what kind of projects are you working on? T, did you want to start?
Sure. So MN350, as we said, we're a climate movement. We are a C3 and a C4. And I joined MN350 in February. So when I'm out in the public talking to people, they're like, you guys do so much. Yes, we do a lot of grassroots root work. So we're always engaged with the community. I'll leave our Green New Deal project last. We have our pipeline. So I talked a little bit about that, but we know that line 3, the pipeline is in the ground. So now we're continuing to work with our Native brothers and sisters and the community for line 5 that is happening in Wisconsin. And so we are there talking about the lessons learned from line 3 and how we can better support them. And so they're doing a mass movement, doing tabling, educating the public about, because line 3, even though the pipeline's in the ground, we still have a group who still have encampments there, concerned about their water. You know, a lot of times we talk about, you know, how we can just grab a cup of water. That's not always true for a lot of communities, and especially in other states who are dealing with water crisis. So there's huge concerns about the pipeline and clean water and the fossil fuels. So they're tabling, they're still doing a lot of active work. They meet with a group of volunteers, I would say weekly, to talk about line 5. Then we have our Missing Murdered Indigenous Women and Relatives campaign that we're working on. That's an environmental justice issue. And so we have an organizer that's working up north, and she's a legal advocate. And because we know that culture plays a big role in how legal representation happens. And so she's like a legal liaison to our missing murdered Indigenous women. And she's doing amazing work, but that's intense work. And it's a lot of confidentiality. So it's hard for her to bring in volunteers and keep some of that stuff that's confidential, but she's doing an amazing job with our missing murdered Indigenous women. It's stressful. So I always try to tell her, take some time to breathe and, take some time for you. And then we have our food systems work. We have 5 different food systems campaign that we're working on. We just recently moved from a part-time organizer, and now we're bringing that work full-time, because it's a lot of work, as you know, with farming, agricultural, regenerative ag. We have a Veggie or Us, so different things that we're doing to engage the community. And they have a large volunteer base. They are having an event coming up in the public where they'll be talking about clean plates, working with restaurants on recycling and making sure that, food waste, how that's handled in food waste, and what the restaurants will do when they have leftover food. So that's a great campaign that they're working on. We have our Green New Deal, which is our large Minneapolis campaign, and that is bringing coalitions together. So Dominique and Blake, we hope that you guys can join us, because we're trying to bring organizations together to talk about our Green New Deal program. And that goal is to make sure Minnesotans, Minneapolis, set the bold and necessary climate equity goals in the climate action planning process this year. So they have a large volunteer base in Minneapolis, and they actually have volunteers in every ward, and they have house parties in every ward. They're going out talking to the public about green jobs, Green New Deal. And so in every ward, and then they just had a nice picnic where each ward showed up, and these wards are represented by volunteers. So if anybody's ever interested in being part of any of our campaigns, but the Green New Deal is seeking feedback from the community. One of the things that we're working on right now to make sure that this plan is inclusive of BIPOC communities, not just with the Green New Deal, but all of ours. That's all of the work that's part of the mission and vision of MN350, to make sure those who are hardest hit by the impacts of climate change and environmental justice issues are at the front line. And so we want to make sure that we are bringing in voices, and that some of the voices of the BIPOC communities are saying, this is what we want, this is what we want to see in the Green New Deal. And so housing, making sure solar panels and all those different things. So right now we're trying to start a stipend campaign where we're going to do some, I would say, some strong recruitment to bring in some fundraising, so that when we're asking BIPOC communities to come be a part of this, that they're not just being a part of it, but they are actively listening and also giving ideas of what they want to see in these bills for the Green New Deal. And so we're working with our elected officials right now, those who are running for office and those who are have been in office and been climate champions with MN350 and with the community. And so we are working actively with them. We have some of our endorsed candidates who's running for office that we will say they're green, which means they are actively supportive of this work, actively supporting the Green New Deal. And so we're asking them now to go out and have conversations with those who are red, and those who are the ones who are just saying not no, but they just don't understand the Green New Deal, the work, and how much it's going to cost and what that's going to look like for the community. And so we are actively working with our elected officials, and our C4 side of our work is working with the Green New Deal to make sure that we're putting the volunteers in place and our message is out there. We're in sync on our message about why this Green New Deal is important. But it's a very large campaign. They're doing a great job. And I'm looking forward to seeing the outcome of it next year. And I'll just table that for now. Thank you, Janiece.
Thank you. Thank you, T. Yeah. MN350 has so much work that is like being done. And there's just kind of like these different threads, but of course, all connected to environment and climate justice. But I would love to return to where you kind of ended with the Green New Deal, because it reminded me, I was trying to name all the things that Dominique was talking about: militarization, unionization, and democracy. That's the one I missed. And it pinged for me to think about, obviously, we have elections and candidates, campaigns, political work, but the kind of like larger aspect of this is democracy and like democratic participation, civic engagement, and of course with something like a huge federal act that got passed a little while ago, we were just talking about the Inflation Reduction Act. All of that is dependent on us having a functional democracy, and that's a much bigger question that I love to dig into. But I'd love to come back to it if you have time. Sure. Or if you have any response to that right now. But yeah, you had named that, Dominique, and it was like,
yeah, I think we can come back to it, because I'm curious to see what Bob and Dominique are going to say. But I'll be remiss if I don't mention our transportation. We have a large transportation program. So we have two different transportation programs. One works with our elected officials, trying to pass laws on electrifying school buses and large fleet buses. And so that's our large campaign that we've been working on. And then we have one where we do the bus rider campaign. And that's where we have volunteers who show up, talk to those who are riding the buses or trains, and ask them about air quality, prices, is it equitable? When they're riding the bus and they have police on the bus, what does that make them feel? And then we bring that feedback to our elected officials. So I also want to talk about our clean air transportation program that we work on. But I'd love to go back to the democracy question after.
For sure. Thank you. All right. Well, Bob, or if you're ready, or Dominique, let's jump in next for. Okay.
Man, can I defer to Dominique on this one, because I want to hear the Dominique talk about democracy too, because it's live.
that too, but if you wanted to talk about your projects a little bit more around Solar Bear or Native Son, but
okay. I thought we were going to democracy. Okay.
Let's hold on to that.
Yeah. I got a lot going on, but I think the big thing that just came up was I just found out that the city is going to tear down the roof depot. And we just did a listening session with the people of Little Earth. And I want to ask all my friends out there, Dominique, T, and the rest of you environmental justice folks to help us and get involved in this campaign that we're going to start here. But I want to go after and electrify the city's trucks and their dump trucks and stuff. And here's what happened, folks, just so you understand. When we had when we brought the community in, one of the mothers said that her kid was having a hard time breathing, and it was because of the diesel in coming from that yard, right? That's what she was talking about. And so, I just, man, I like, we got to do something about that, man. That's not cool, And so, when I found out that the roof depot is going to be, the city of Minneapolis is going to tear it down now, then I thought to myself, well, let's electrify that fleet over there. So some of you may know that I have a knack for going in and looking at federal grants, and I found something from the EPA that I think we could do this. And so I'm going to go ahead and we're going to put this together, and I'm going to reach out to the city of Minneapolis, and this is where I'm probably going to need some of my organizers' friends' help, right? And I want to electrify that fleet so those young kids don't have to be smelling that diesel gas. I mean, if we can't change the situation, then maybe we could electrify that fleet then, so that's the big campaign we're going to be working on with Native Son here coming up. And not that we don't have our hands full with other things. We just got a $500,000 grant to do the Solar Cup program, which is a K-12 curriculum with the Solar Bear family. So it's basically the Solar Bear family teaching kids about STEM and education and the Ojibwe and language culture. The statistics show that Native kids graduate at a much higher rate if they have culture and language in their curriculum. So this has all been a part of my process about getting the Solar Cup program off the ground, and so this has been really exciting. We're working with PBS on that, by the way, so this is going to be like a cartoon. So it's going to be pretty exciting. And then we've been working on this electric vehicle charging network. We're going to be installing charging stations coming this month, October 1st. Oh, no, I'm sorry, September 30th, October 1st. In October, we're going to start installing these charging stations. And what that is it's an electric vehicle charging network spanning from the Twin Cities to Red Lake Nation, out to Standing Rock, and back to the Twin Cities. And what it was in resistance to the fossil fuel infrastructure. And I wanted to be able to show that even though you built Line 3, doesn't mean we have to accept it. And I want to be able to give people the opportunity or chance to choose whether they want to drive an electric vehicle or they want to continue to buy gas, So that was basically the whole idea on that. And we were the highest awardee in the country. So when Vice President Harris and Department of Energy Secretary Granholm made their announcement, the Native Son Community Park Development was the top. And so that was really cool out in Pennsylvania. And so that's so those are like, some of the big things that we're working on. And then we've got some workforce development stuff that we're continuously doing. And my hands in a lot of different things. So yeah, that's probably what we're working on right there. But I'll confer to Dominique next. Thank you, everyone.
Well, congratulations again on that amazing award that you got. Yeah, you are a busy guy. And that's a very good thing. Native Son and Solar Bear and Solar Cub. That is just delightful. I love that so much.
Oh, so, and Janiece, I want to tell everybody too that for Solar Bear, we're partnered with Knoebel Storff Electric, and so we'll be working on the Net Zero project down in Prairie Island for the $46 million. So we were part of that awardee, and then we are working on a 400 megawatt solar project in northern Minnesota. So those are a couple of things that are happening in that world too. And then we should be installing a solar system on top of the McGeezy building on Lake Street here that was burnt during the stuff that happened. So just to give you a quick update on solar too.
Amazing.
Bear. Thanks.
Oh my gosh, we could have a whole webinar of just you telling us about all these amazing projects and certainly in ways that what are the ways that people can get involved and support your work, because that's just fantastic. Definitely going to follow up with you on the Minneapolis trucks, getting those turning those electric, because that's always a priority for Fresh Energy. Just going to throw that out. Dominique, all right. If it's a thing that you'd like to share about projects that you're working on in a little more detail, but yeah, I think everybody's very excited to hear what I have to say about our next section around vision, which could include things around democracy. If you'd like to share.
I think just to share what some folks might be sitting with already, but both what T and Bob just shared, I think are natural examples of how comprehensive organizing and movement building could work. Bob, to your example of meeting the needs of people in a way that also puts wealth and power back into the hands of Indigenous people and determines that you'll be at the onset of what the future looks like. That's one of those, I think, victories that we can't even see we won't even be able to see the full impact of it until several generations from now. T, you being in this role and not only inheriting all the work that MN350 has been able to do, but also being at the helm with your own unique perspective, talking about the value of community and culture. I mean, how many Black women can we say are leading environmental organizations right now? I could say not enough, but we're lucky that we have at least one with us now. Because movement building is really important. It's got to be comprehensive. It's got to be broad-based. And I think some of the most radical things you could do is the listening session that you mentioned in Little Earth, Bob. Some of the most radical things I think you could do is to ask someone, how does it feel with the way things are now? And how should things be? And then to sit with them and promise to resolve to get us from point A to point B really could be really transformative. And I think, you know, in my own role, so I used to just be a regular old activist showing up where I want to show up, saying what I want to say. And now I'm in this organization, which, you know, can be seen by some as moderate, can be seen as not always making the right decisions in the eyes of some people. And I'm kind of at this crossroads where I'm split a little bit. And so one important part of my organizing now, I think, is the transformative work that NGOs need to start to do. You know, I myself am part of an organization, Sierra Club, which has endeavored to have a pretty strong internal conversation about what are the shifts that need to be made in our priorities, in our culture, and in who has leadership to ensure that we can honestly keep up with the progressive demands of what climate justice is going to look like in the next several years. Luckily, we have an amazing team here who've elected some volunteer leaders to create something called the Change and Equity Team, who's working in partnership with some of those most impacted communities and also informing the direction that Sierra Club takes as an organization. So big green organizations, like we call them, big greens, the more that we're in actionable and accountable relationships with environmental justice communities, the more that we're able to build those comprehensive victories, right? So through coalition building, such as the Alliance, through introducing inclusive decision-making processes, we can really start to ensure that we move beyond these single issue fights so that when any one of us win, we all win. An example that I'd like to highlight here, and I really wish that there was someone here to speak from the center of this right now, but if anyone's aware of the Minnesota Environmental Justice BIPOC table, this is a coalition of activists, you know, who largely volunteer their time towards this, although some of them may work for environmental organizations. But they're working with community and these mainstream organizations and elected officials to elevate these environmental justice concerns and build movement around them. So the Roof Depot in South Minneapolis is one example. And another major target of theirs is the Hennepin Energy Recovery Center, the HERC, the trash burner in downtown Minneapolis, which exposes mostly near North Minneapolis and a lot of downtown to a lot of toxic air pollution. They've been building for a number of years, you know, in a grassroots movement for locals will know has been happening for a very long time. But they've kind of inherited a lot of that battle now. And they've been working with community to really build that leadership, because I think the table knows in order to win that the victory needs to be shaped by frontline communities, not only to ensure that it benefits them, but because they have the best perspective for where decisive victory will be. And the more that they work in community, the more that they'll start to see successes as they start to leverage that influence with the Sierra Clubs and the MN350s of the world, with the elected officials and other powerful stakeholders. Once they go in and leverage those relationships in a way that defends the interests of community members, then we'll start to see more transformative change. Finally, it wouldn't be me if I didn't speak to funders. The giving community has a really important role in this, as they always do, and we need to make sure that they don't step back and act like they could be issue agnostic and, you know, fund things that fit their criteria perfectly. We need to also inform them how to shape their criteria, because some of the folks in philanthropy are justice oriented, you know, they're woke like us, you know, they're good at power analysis and stuff. Some of them aren't, right? And some of them might need a little bit of instruction in what that looks like, what being progressive looks like. Funders could do a lot of good for us if they start to fund these grassroots collaboratives, like the XL Energy pilot that I mentioned from a couple of years ago, or like the BIPOC table itself. These collaboratives are a little bit more able to articulate specific means to address some of these issues. Funders should maybe stay away from subsidizing industry scale transition if it's not attached to a transformational change at a systems level. So like what Bob's talking about, that's a transformational change at a systems level. It overhauls an energy system in a way that restores power back to the people who had their power taken away. Finally, they need to stop being afraid of protest. Funders need to meet the rising tide of movement building and community organizing so that we can address these issues head on. It's not always going to come with a backroom deal with a politician with a prepackaged reconciliation bill all ready to go and be passed. Sometimes it's going to have to be won by agitation and by winning the hearts and minds. And if community members aren't able to get resources in their pockets to change hearts and minds, then we're not going to have any North Star really to go towards as a movement. And so a few of us got to work internally with our organizations. A few of us got to continue to listen to community and carry those demands upwards. And a lot of us got to start agitating the funding community to show them how to support us.
So clear. I heard very clear demands from you, Dominique. Thank you so much. Yeah, thank you for the shout out of the BIPOC EJ table. I am a member of that, so thank you. And I know that Dominique, I would call an honorary member because you were right there at the beginning with us, helping us to shape what we had a vision for that space to be. So I mean, you are always part of that space. So thank you for that. Yeah, you're getting lots of good love in the chat for everything you just said.
Can I just respond?
Yeah, I'm going to say T and Bob. Yeah, please.
Well, I'm just going to respond to Dominique. One of the things, because I think that's a good shout out or a good recommendation that you gave to funders. I'm just going to call them out. I usually don't, but Trillium Foundation is a funder. And then, of course, Fresh Energy is too. But when we're applying for grants and at the very end, when you're writing your report, I think it's good to put those recommendations in there. Because Trillium Foundation did a good job by having a learning table. So they had different their grantees come together and talk about what worked. And so they really wanted to elevate the voices of the BIPOC communities whose hardest hit by, these issues. And so they didn't want to be so prescriptive by saying you must do these things. What can we learn from you? And one of the things I've learned being in this space, especially in the grant space for a long time, is to give that feedback. Hey, is it okay if I give you some feedback? Because some of the grants are so restrictive that you blink too hard, then you're off on what you said that you was going to do. So some of them are so restrictive. So I think just by having a conversation with them, because it's relationship too, they want to improve, they want to hear feedback, and so they're open if you just give them that. So at the end, when you're writing your report, my suggestion is just to kind of give them that feedback because everything you said was on point. And I think most funders, as you continue to work in that space, is open to that feedback.
To everything that T and Dominique just said, man, the funders know that I always give them my opinion. They know that I'm always telling them, man, like, hey, man, you need to stop with this, man. So y'all know who you are, foundations, because you deal with me. So I'm always giving you my opinion. And the federal government too. I give them my opinion too about all the BS they make you jump through. So, but I'm happy to say though that that they're listening. And like if you want more of me or you want more of Dominique and T and the rest of us doing what we do because we got the pulse, right? We have a hand on the pulse. Then you need to come off a little bit of of whatever it is that you're asking, of us, because you either want us out there or you want us sitting here writing stuff. You know what I'm saying? So, those are the things that I say to them, and that's exactly spot on with what both T and Dominique said.
Yeah.
Are we going back to the democracy question? I think, yeah.
Yes, if we are ready to that. And I just want to, acknowledge that there are some things being said in the chat too. I just really appreciate that whole point because I feel like, as somebody who works at Fresh Energy, we are not an environmental justice organization, but we partner with so many of you who do a lot of environmental justice work. It's really important for me to hear that and for organizations environmental climate justice ecosystem overall to really hear these messages too, that like there are issues within funding, there are issues with the way that we partner with, and that's with each other. And like so much of the work around EJ, environmental justice, equity work, anti-racism work, like you're saying, Dominique, talk about Sierra Club, like we're doing a lot of that work internally as well at Fresh Energy. Like it is about the way we work together, and the way that we do our work is just as important as the work that we're doing. Because if we're not doing that equitably, if we're not doing that with justice at the center, if we are not paying attention to the way that we interact with each other, then how do we expect the policies or the projects or the outcomes that we're working for to be reflective of what we want if we're not doing that, if we're not modeling that as the way we work together. And so that's something that I talk a lot about at Fresh Energy internally, but that is a really important conversation that we as an ecosystem of organizations have to have with each other as well. So thank you for bringing that in.
Yeah, and I agree, if it's okay, Janiece, just to add
Yes,
that,
please.
the climate space, I got into the climate space because I feel like I have a background in healthcare. I worked 18 years in the emergency room, and then I worked in labor, then I worked in human services, and it was human services that really propelled, I would say, my growth into climate, because I think all of it intersects, right? The healthcare crisis, the food systems, all of that intersects. But then when you look at the climate space, historically, the climate and environmental, well, I would say the climate movement space has not been open to BIPOC communities. It hasn't been open to faces that look like mine, especially in leadership roles. So I think to Dominique's point, thank you for that shout out. I'm honored to be in the space that I am in. But as I say, it's not just about me. It's about me bringing voices, communities of color who have been disenfranchised to the front, to the front where their voices are heard, where they're saying this is what we need. I think that democracy and advocacy is so important. When you have a movement, a campaign, you have to hear the voices of the communities that we know have been hardest hit by that. And by going out there, because it was a campaign internally at MN350, MN350 was formed in 2012, became a nonprofit, and we have a large volunteer base, and they do an amazing job. And so we look at that, and I'm a woman of color, and I look in and I say, who in the room looks like me or from my community? And if I don't see a lot of people that's BIPOC that look like me, then we need some changes internally. And these are tough conversations to have, but they're necessary, because we can't keep saying that we're for this and this is why we're doing this work when we don't have faces that look like us, who's having key roles in volunteering and being staff and interns in our movement. So I think it's important to always recognize that and be unapologetic to call it out, in a respectful way internally, to say, we got a problem. We don't have very many BIPOC people, who's volunteering or having lead roles or who's in a position. And so that's what I hope to bring to the table, along with my other brothers and sisters in this movement, is to really call it out and do it unapologetically, because this movement is not we're going to continue to be stalemate if we don't continue to raise the voices of our BIPOC communities.
And I want to second that too, what you just said, man, because I just took this new, one of the new things that, this job I just took here recently with Indigenized Energy Initiative is basically Cal Berkeley, right? And so Cal Berkeley's talking to me like, hey, listen, you're a national guy now, we want to support your efforts and da-da-da-da-da, whoop-de-whoop. And I'm like, well, yeah, but this other folks out here doing it too, and you need to be supporting them too, you know what I'm saying? So, but if you're going to give me this platform then, because I've been in front of these national funders now, I've been telling them, you know what I'm saying? Like, you need to look at that, at these other communities, to all of us, really. You know what I'm saying? Like you need to be putting us in executive director, because we know what's happening, and so, in leadership roles too. So I've been now I got the little platform, right? And I think it's really important, and it's not my responsibility. I know that, you know what I'm saying, but it's all our responsibility. But because I got this little thing, right, I'm gonna let them know, because I start just as an organizer. I just started from the roots, right? Like, so I think it's really important though too, like she said, just to let them know, let them, and they may not want to hear that from me. I don't know, you know what I mean? But I'm going to continue to voice my opinion that we need more people that are leading these organizations that understand what's happening on the that grew up around it, that understands what's going down. And so I just want to say that what T was just saying was totally, and that's what just sparked with me, because I just had this conversation when I got hired by this, this organization that's based out of Cal Berkeley. And I said, okay, you want me, then okay, this is what I want from you. You know what I mean? I want more people of color. I want more folks, being recognized. And so anyways, yeah, thank you.
They may not want to hear it from you, Bob, but they're going to. They're going to. And so, yeah, thank you for, I love that you say, maybe it's not our responsibility, but it is at the same time. It is our responsibility as folks who do have a platform, who have spaces to speak, who have some sense of power within it, whether it's in our organizations or media or what have you, honestly, wherever you are. Like, I think this is honestly a responsibility for any person in this movement. You don't have to be a director or, have a national spotlight. It's on everyone. It's on every one of us to cultivate the leadership, particularly of people of color, of BIPOC folks, of women, of non-binary folks, of young people, like people who are the most marginalized, people from frontline communities. It's on all of us to cultivate that leadership, to foster that, to support people, and especially into when they are in those spaces, especially when they get into those spaces that can be, might on the surface look like, oh, like what a great honor, or what like a cool role for you, but like it's not easy to be the one in those spaces either, right? Like some of it can feel kind of lonely, some of it can be kind of isolating. Sometimes you're facing a lot of uphill battles that like are not seen, right, or not visible. So we have to support each other in all the paths on all our journeys, because that honestly, humanity is kind of dependent on it. Because we're here talking about our climate, we're here talking about our planet, we're talking about the future that we all want and deserve. We're talking about young people who are having trouble breathing, and it's like, yeah, this is literally talking about people's lives here and all of our communities and all of our lives. All right.
And I took this position because of that, right? Like if you're telling me that I could take this national, I can do this, and then you're gonna help fund it, and you're gonna bring in big people to fund it and everything. Okay. And because I understand the current situation right now that's happening with our climate, right? Like that's my big issue. So, I get that. So, but I think at the same time, like, we definitely have to, bring other folks, along with it, and then highlight them too. So, exactly why I even took this gig,
Well, I'm so glad you did, because we're all going to benefit from your leadership there, Bob. So I think good transition to go on to what was our final question here, and then we'll go on to Q&A. We still have a little time. Vision. That was the last thing we're going to talk about. So what do we need to scale these types of changes at the community and movement level, and to pivot more fully to solutions that get at the root of environmental injustice and racism? I think this is a perfect place to bring in that element of democracy as well, right? Like, so what is the vision that we need to get to the future that we all deserve? Imagine that. A democratically engaged one is part of that. I'm going to throw it to whoever wants to start. I think everybody wants Dominique to start.
I'm kind of taken. I'll be really brief, because I like a lot of the more recent questions that I like them all in the chat, but a lot of these I think are really important too. First of all, there's a saying that's not really attributed to anybody, but it says that like democracy is meaningless without an educated populace. And I think that what we've seen is the forcible dumbing down, not making stupid but the forcible dumbing down is in removing knowledge or replacing knowledge with lies by people who currently profit from the status quo. We've experienced that pretty generationally in the United States. And so we're nearing a place where our democracy is going to be pretty meaningless. And we also face a reality where the right-wing party of our country is now far-right fascist. There's no point in debating it. It is a fascist party. And the left party is, once progressive leaning, is now moving like center moderate. So there's a lot that needs to be done in educating folks who are walking the plank into fascism about some of the consequences of what the future this could lead to, and also holding accountable those who claim to represent the progressive left. Because ultimately the only way to make this happen, the only way to have a sustainable future and to prevent any more catastrophic events related to climate change from happening, because they're already coming, is the redistribution of wealth. And that means resources, labor, power, and autonomy. An affirmative action-based approach toward funding and upgrading infrastructure, and challenging the infinite growth model of capitalism, because that growth is really premised upon massive waste and destruction that just creates money in the pockets of shareholders. Democracy isn't confined to the voting booth. Sometimes it's in your home, sometimes it's in your workplace, sometimes it's a place that you volunteer. Everybody's voice matters in a democracy, not just those who've been chosen to lead. And so first we got to reteach democracy and what it looks like. And then I think we got to defend it pretty militantly.
Yeah, I believe that was Socrates, right? That said, because I'm a big philosopher, right? I read all the philosophers, and it was Socrates that said that Socrates was the father of democracy, right? Plato, wrote the Republic off of the stuff that Socrates was talking about. And Socrates said the reason why he hates democracy is because you're going to have an educated electorate that's going to, nominate someone that's going to lead us down a bad path. And that was what Socrates said. It's the father of democracy hated democracy because of that very reason, which is kind of funny. But yeah, I agree with Dominique, man, and that's how come they say, like people always ask me, Bob, why are you doing what you're doing? I said, because I want to, because we need to decolonize the the electric grid, which is killing us. These electric companies got 80-year coal contracts, 50-year coal contracts, man. They're set to sell us coal at a certain price for the next 50, 80 years. And I'm telling you, folks, we don't have the time for that, And so why are you trying to build tribal utilities and put, all across the country? Well, because like I said, we need to decolonize the electric grid. We need to colonize the system. Okay, why are you trying to build electric vehicle charging networks? Why are you putting them on? Because we need to decolonize the transportation system. The transportation system is killing us, And so, this what Dominique just said, and I want to, and the whole part about decolonizing that is like, giving the power back to the folks, back to the people. And this isn't just like, some type of like, let's go hug a tree or something type of attitude. This is like national security. We can't have an interconnected grid like we once did. We can't, because just on a national security level, right? And so this is much deeper than than the utilities or the 1% is going to tell you. You know what I'm saying? Like, this is much deeper. This is about survival, and with climate change and everything that's going to be happening. I just think it's so important. So that's why, I'm doing what I'm doing, right? And it's really trying to decolonize the electric grid and decolonize the transportation system, because I firmly believe those two things are what's killing this planet and killing all of us. And if we can attack those two things, I'm not stupid to the science, people, and so if I could just do that and give some time, maybe there's someone down the line that's going to come up with something that's going to like help us. Where there's some kid out there that is going to like figure it out loud, but we got to buy him some time. That's what it is. I only have the technology that I have here right now to work with. You know what I mean? but maybe this kid someday is going to like, oh, this is what we got to do. You know what I'm saying? So that's where it is, folks. Just let's buy the time for that dude, you know, or for that woman, whatever. You know what I'm saying? For that kid, because she gonna figure it out.
So good.
I'll just only add, because my fellow panelists said it all, and like Dominique and Robert, I want to make sure we have time for comments and questions in the chat. I'll just add that, you know, we know, and I've said this in some of my other speeches, that we know research shows that many people believe in the crisis of climate change and they want change. But I also believe that it's going to take us working together to dismantle the systems of oppression that has been at the forefront for a long, long time. And, you know, I always look back because my role models are historic and they have moved on. But they created a movement, right? And so they passed that baton on to us. And they passed on huge oppressions, things that was just like in slavery, all the different things that they had to fight against. And it took organizing. It took community action. It took, you know, bringing people together and educating people on this is not going to happen. So I think our vision is to go back to that. We have become a little, I would say, a little complacent, you know, where sometimes when you see someone marching, it's like, oh my God, what are they doing this time of day? You know, that's how you bring attention, awareness to the issue. And so we have to be okay being uncomfortable that, yes, it's not the time of day, and yes, you know, block traffic. And so, yes, that's another part of me. I believe in, because people are going to ask the question, like, why are they doing that? Or why are they tabling at this event? Then that's the way that you can start educating them. Well, did you know? And you also have to be able to meet people where they are. Not everyone speaks our language and comes from the same culture. So you got to make sure that the material and the information that we are distributing is inclusive of all communities, that they can read it and they can understand it. Because a lot of times when I have done community organizing for many years, I always have to say, why is this in English? You know, why is this in English? We're going to a different community that doesn't read English as well. And so we have to make sure that we're aware of these things. And that's why diversity internally in your organization is so huge, because you can call those things out. That's why the BIPOC caucus is so huge. MN350 has a BIPOC caucus. And these are the things that we talk about to make sure that when we're thinking about new programs, new organizing efforts, that are we being inclusive? Are we making sure that we're reaching all communities? And I think that's important. Those BIPOC caucus is important. If you don't have those in your organization, I think those are helpful. If you're trying to switch I wouldn't say switch, but become more aware that BIPOC caucus, whether you start with 2 and work your way up, that's important to have, because they will be the ones that be able to call that out. And so I think it's an internal shift, and then externally to just kind of remember that sometimes public awareness is important.
Yeah. That's great, T. Thank you so much. Yeah. Well, thank you all so much. This has just been such a fantastic discussion, and like so broad, but yet so deep, because that's I think to be expected, because I think that's kind of how we all approach our work, this being like life's work for, I think, each and every one of us, because it's all of our lives dependent on it. So thank you so much for your words and wisdom. And we can keep going. I know there's lots of questions that have popped up in the chat, so I want to give space to be able to answer a few of them if we can. But before we move on, is there anything left to you all? I mean, feel free to like wrap in other things at the end of the questions as well, but I want to make sure I give you all space for any more thoughts there on the last question of vision and democracy, as I scroll up to find the questions. I don't know, that's cool. Okay, well, I'm going to go back to the question. I mean, the first question I saw pop up in the chat is actually kind of, I think, is a good segue to what you were just ending, T, around language, right? So it's like, so the question in the chat was, you know, how communication is possible. Okay, the question is, please advise how communication is possible with rural conservatives. You know, maybe you haven't answered that, maybe you don't, but I feel like I think the kind of larger point is, yeah, communication, language. How do we talk to each other about the need to address this climate crisis that impacts every single one of us? But knowing that, like, we all, as you were saying, we all don't come from the same place. We all don't have the same experience. So if anybody has any advice or even a story about how you might talk to somebody different from you about these issues.
Yeah, when we started this whole thing, I mean, we came out with with this electric vehicle charging network before Pete Buttigieg, before President Biden, and General Motors and all them folks start coming out with their plans. They saw all the press we were getting, and they were like, "Oh, we got better jump on board on this," No, but I mean, one of the things that I said in one of them interviews with the magazines was, that we need to bring this out into the rural areas too. Like we need to make them see that they can be a part of this change too, and they can be a part of this transition. So I liken this to like a Route 66. In that folks are going to be riding this line, taking their family because they don't want to jump on a plane to Europe right now. There's a pandemic. There's stuff happening. There's a war going on. You know what I mean? I don't know. So I mean, they want to get on and take the family out, right? And they're going to be spending money, man. They're going to be staying in hotels, and then and these are ways that we can show the rural community that they can be a part of this, right? And you'd be amazed at like how much of them rural Pierce Meats calling me up. Bob, can we get one of them? Pierce, Minnesota, Pierce Meats, this owner of that place. Bob, can we get one of them electric vehicle charging stations? Another restaurant called me up right over by Moorhead, Minnesota. I mean, these folks are listening, man. They're watching us, and they appreciate when we're sitting there saying we need to do this together. You know what I mean? So don't be afraid to go out there and let them know that, hey man, we want you a part of this too, because this is gonna uplift all of us. You know what I mean? So I just want to say that was some of the conversations I've been having with rural folks, and they've been going really good, and they understand, they get it, and they know that it's coming anyways. So be a part of it. So
Yeah.
my 2 cents.
Yeah, I would only add that our approach may be different, urban and rural. I just had someone who was saying yesterday to me, hey, don't forget about the rural communities. And so I would say I would go to those as far as communication. What does it look like in the rural communities? What may work in urban communities may not work in rural communities, because what they're dealing with is different. Their whole lifestyle may be different than what's happening in Minneapolis, St. Paul, because a lot of things happen in the congested Minneapolis, St. Paul and surrounding suburbs. But when you go further out, which I've done lots of door knocks and campaigning out in up north and further south of Minnesota, because MN350 is not just a Minneapolis, St. Paul base. We are a Minnesota base. And so I like to get out to, the rural communities. But my approach may be different. How I do things may be different because it may not work the same way. And I also would like to hear from them. Like, what do you want? What communication style would you like? It may be tabling is not right, and maybe they just want to read something and they want to read it in a language that makes sense to them, or because we like to send everything electronically. And I had one community that say that doesn't work for us. We still like the old fashioned, mail it to us. And okay, if that works, then it works. So I just think we got to meet people where they're at.
Yeah, for sure. It's that, and like I think that's just good advice for anyone. It's just like, you just got to start with meeting people where they're at, and that's okay. Like, and I think it's even, maybe you're speaking to this T, but like so helpful as people who work in this field, who are organizing, who do FEC. Like, I know for me, when I give me time to like take that step back to like meet somebody who is not maybe not where I know that I need to like rewind, because it actually helps me like internalize and actually be more educated about what I think that I have expertise in. If somebody calls me up and says, hey, I'd like to, you know, learn more about electrification in my home, like what can I do to like lower my bills, things like that. And it makes me have to like take that step back and understand, well, I can't just go at it answering this question from the policy perspective of like, oh, we're advocating on all these things around weatherization or like conservation improvement program. Is that what they're asking for? It's like, is it for them hearing about the advocacy of this policy actually going to help them lower their bills? No. So let me rewind and actually get to answering the questions that, you know, people are asking us for, and then we can work our way up there if it lends to that. But I think it makes me come back down to earth. I guess is the way of putting it. Like, it's about the work on the ground. It's about how we actually impact people's lives, and we have to be conscious about where people are coming from.
Yeah, and Janiece, someone just put a comment in there that we should not forget collectively about our immigrant families with mixed status. And I agree. I worked on immigration reform for many years, so I hear you, and it's always at the forefront.
Sure. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, and it's always very good to remind us too that environmental justice truly touches every single aspect of our lives, right? It is about everything from our statuses as immigrants or citizens of this country to who can drive freely, where you can go freely. Yeah, it touches everything. Okay, to get to a couple more questions before we end. There was a couple questions around back to the IRA and like, I would say more generally, kind of the national or even like institutional making efforts for things like so the EPA's recent environmental justice office, so the Office of Environmental Justice, things like I think there was something in the chat about 3M having like a director of, I don't know if it's an environmental justice at 3M's foundation. But I think maybe the larger question I'm going to wrap it together in is, how do we feel about seeing very large scale institutions, whether government, whether philanthropic, whether academic, creating positions, offices around equity, environmental justice, anti-racism? I think we know that those things are like necessary, but like, how do we know that they're truly effective? I think is maybe where I want to take that question. And it's not to say that like it's our responsibility to make sure that they're effective, but so that it doesn't end up being tokenizing, so that it doesn't end up being like, these are promises made, but they're not promises kept kind of thing. And it's just like, if anybody has any sort of like reaction or response to seeing more institutions talk about environmental justice. Is it a trend, or is it something that we actually, is it hopefully leading us to the transformation that we need? Maybe. Any thoughts there?
I don't know if my thoughts are in any order, but I think about the tendency of things to want to get ahead of stuff, right? I think like the proverbial thing is the way that corporations, many of whom didn't really care too much about the LGBTQ community until there was a critical mass of citizens who built a movement out of it. And now they're quick to ensure you that they're always issuing a special product line for Pride and that they're friends of the LGBTQ community and stuff like that. There's like a fine line, right, where we could walk, where we could think that acceptance by an institution can mean that they want to turn in our favor as any community or as any interest group. And I think that like the fine line, how we stay on our side of it, is to maintain pressure without giving full consent to the outcome, right? So if the White House or 3M or more recently, the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency wanted to create an environmental justice advisory group, kind of like a rubber stamp board who could give their feedback on things from an environmental justice perspective, support them in that, right? Support them, tell them why it's important to continue to invest in that, tell them why you as an expert have a right to be there, but make sure that the burden of proof is on them to show that they're willing to invest in something different, right? Don't necessarily say that I'll join you and whatever outcome comes out of it is a shared outcome. Really hold them to it. You know, for instance, with Hennepin County working on a zero waste program right now, the goal is that the zero waste program can help to scale down consumer waste so much that we no longer have to burn our garbage to create an environmental justice issue. That doesn't necessarily mean that everybody in Minneapolis has to come up with a solution for how to lessen their trash, because the fact of the matter is nobody chose to create so much waste, right? So the burden of proof is on those who are already benefiting from the current arrangement. And the more that we can kind of keep them on their side of the line and pressure them more towards it, the more I hope that we could start to see some of those positive outcomes. I also think that we should honestly use their language against them a lot of the time. So Ricardo is mentioning the role of racial justice or immigration reform as a key cornerstone of what a justice rooted or a future rooted in justice looks like. So what are the ways that we can use talking points related to environmental justice or climate justice to enforce greater wins for the immigrant justice and the racial justice community, right? Maybe we could think about how certain corporate activities might lead to environmental destruction and destabilization in the global South, forcing a lot of people who don't want to leave their homeland to have to come to the United States, where they're treated with incarceration and racism. How can we start to tie those links together so that we really prevent the harm that's happening from the current arrangement? So co-opt them before they co-opt us.
Yeah, and I want to that's right there with me. Dominique dealt with this, right, Janiece, and we all talked about this during line 3 with the city of St. Paul, right? And like city of St. Paul, you could be against it if it's the Dakota Access Pipeline, but you can't be against it if it's line 3. Come on, Mayor Carter. You know what I'm saying? Like, come on, man. You know, and so we dealt with that, but you know what though? We stood strong and we stood unified, everyone. And we told them how we felt about line 3 and that we didn't want it. And did they follow us? No, I get it. The DFL and the union are connected. I get it. It's all politics. Well, you ain't gonna tell me any different. So, but you know what though? But we stood strong, and the point being there is that we let them hear what we said. And so I do believe, just like Dominic, we gotta be in them spaces. We gotta let the mayors know how we feel. We gotta let these people of power in Xcel Energy. Xcel Energy gave me money for my vehicle charging network. You know what I mean? So if I could use their funds to get what I need to get done, to get charging stations in rural areas and in Native American communities, I'm going to do it. You know what I mean? So, we need to be able to, like Dominique said, to be able to like work with these folks, but still hold them accountable.
Well said. T, if there's anything you want to add there?
No, I didn't. I'm sorry. I have comments that's just to me in the chat, so I was responding to some of those, but I don't have anything to add. I think that my fellow panelists said it all, so I don't have anything to add.
Absolutely. Well, I know we are at time, but just to give any more space for your kind of parting words or call to action. But I mean, yeah, y'all are amazing. I heard a lot of calls to action throughout this entire discussion, but anything left for parting words?
I just want to say thank you, Janiece, for moderating this. It was just a pleasure to be here with my fellow panelists, Dominique and Robert. I enjoyed, and I look forward to working with you guys. And I'll just say, if you have anybody or you yourself are interested in partnering with MN350, please reach out to me or go to our website. We have plenty of volunteer opportunities. Our mission right now is to make sure that we're community-led, so we want to hear what our communities are saying, partner organizations. And so we love to partner in some of the work that we are collectively doing together. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much. Dominique, any parting words you'd like to share? If not, you left us with a mic drop show every single time, so thank you. Bob?
Yeah, I would just say, hey, everyone, I'm very serious about electrifying that fleet over there in the city of Minneapolis. So I'm going to need everyone's help when I get going on this. I'll put together the grant and all the other stuff, and then I'll reach out to everybody when I need your help. So I think we should really do this for South Minneapolis. So thank you.
Oh, awesome. Well, Thank you so much.